Welcome to another episode brought to you by Imagine Strength, the future of safe, simple, and effective high-intensity training equipment. Are you a HIIT studio owner looking for equipment that's not just top-notch, but also tailored to your specific needs? Imagine Strength is your answer. Inspired by the legendary Arthur Jones, Imagine Strength is revolutionizing the HIIT industry with their state-of-the-art yet affordable equipment. Their team doesn't just sell HIIT equipment, they live and breathe it. I've personally experienced their gear at the Resistance Exercise Conference, and let me tell you, it was an intense workout that I won't soon forget, in the best way possible, of course. So why choose Imagine Strength? Number one, they provide customized solutions for HIIT studios. Number two, they have budget-friendly yet high-performance designs. And number three, they're committed to innovation and excellence in high-intensity training specifically. Founder Jeff Turner and his dedicated team are on a mission to make HIIT accessible to everyone. Getting started is easy. Number one, visit imaginestrength.com. Number two, consult with their expert team. And number three, choose the equipment that will skyrocket your business. Don't wait. Head over to imaginestrength.com and elevate your HIIT studio today with Imagine Strength. Lawrence Snell here, and welcome back to High Intensity Business, your one-stop shop for elevating your HIIT business and fueling your passion for high-intensity training. This is episode 429, and today's episode is a deep dive into the book Joint Friendly Fitness, the Optimal Exercise Program by Bill DeSimone. Joining me is Bill DeSimone to help us go through this exciting deep dive. For those that don't know, Bill DeSimone is an ACE certified health coach, senior fitness specialist, and owner of Optimal Exercise in Cranbury, New Jersey, and has certifications in functional anatomy, functional fitness, and orthopedic exercise. He started training people all the way back in '93 at the Sports Training Institute in New York City. He developed the Joint Friendly Fitness Project, which draws on anatomy and biomechanics, providing clients with all the benefits of regular exercise while reducing the risk of injuries. And he's also the author of Congruent Exercise and Moment Arm Exercise, which are obviously very well known in fitness and strength training, in particular in high intensity training. I've loved reading Joint Friendly Fitness. I'm a huge fan. That's why Bill and I have obviously been working together to promote it. I found it very valuable for my own training, as well as improving how we train clients at our studio here in Galway called Optimus Strength. And I'm really excited today, Bill, to go through this deep dive on the book so people can get a little bit of a better understanding of what it's all about, some of the key findings and key things they can learn. Let's get into this presentation. So over to you.
Thanks, Lawrence. So you should be seeing the cover of the book to start.
Yep. I should say, sorry, Bill, before you get started, if people are listening to this, we're going to paint a picture with wonderful flowery language as much as we can. But I urge you to try and get over to YouTube to actually watch this, because this is a very visual presentation with lots of different images of anatomy and physiology to really demonstrate what Bill's going to be talking about in terms of exercising safely. Sorry, Bill, over to you. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. So the point of the cover, by the way, was to show the different types of exercises included in the book. So I didn't want it to be interpreted as a free weights only book or a machine only book or body weight only. As you can see, we have barbells, not body weight exercises. And just because it's on the cover doesn't mean I'm a fan of the exercise. It just means it's covered in the book. And another thing about the cover, that's me in the upper left doing the squat. And to the right of me is my daughter on the elliptical. To the right of her is my son doing wrist curls. Below him is my wife doing a pull down, and she's doing a triceps press down. The woman doing the plank, Cindy, I helped get started in personal training a while back, and she still sees clients in my studio. And she was actually in Moment Arm Exercise also. To her right is her husband, Silas, who came in at very short notice. Thank you, bud. And then below her on the pullover machine is Sabrina, who was one of my interns who worked at Adam Zickerman's for about a year. And then she went off and became a registered nurse.
Oh, wow.
So thanks to her and Adam for letting me use their studio for a handful of the exercises.
So I can see your son in the bottom left about to press behind the neck. And I could just imagine before he did that, I said, Dad, you told me never to do this.
Funny thing, he would say to me, hey, Dad, this hurts. And I'd say, I know. I know. That's why you're doing it, not me. But yeah, so in going, and actually, you'll see he got all the excruciatingly shoulder painful exercises because I've had surgeries and I've got 65-year-old shoulders. So no, he was doing them. But I said, yes. I said, but that is the point, Matt. The point is that these positions hurt. That's what the book is about. Yeah. So it was a fun process. Now, by the way, the actual laying out, the actual formatting was done by Autumn Bean, who was a sister of one of my interns, Ariel Bean. And during the COVID shutdown, they wanted to shut down the internships, and she didn't want to lose the credits. So she said, do you have anything I can work on at home? And I said, as a matter of fact, I'm trying to finish and format this book. And she agreed a little too quickly. And that's when I realized her sister was an art educator and a master's, working on her master's in art. So all the everything that works visually is all Autumn and Ariel.
Wow.
Because I sent them stick figures and straight lists of words. And I did send them one or two of Darden's books for the general look I wanted, with a lot of very clear, using white space, like not jamming border to border with small font and single line. I wanted it to be readable.
Yeah. All right.
Anyway, so that was, and like I said, not every exercise there is one I'm a fan of. Some of them I'm pretty critical of.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Now let's see here. Didn't we just do this where we got the...
You just hit arrows left and right. Arrows left and right should drive the presentation as well, hopefully.
Okay, so now the table of contents. Again, I gave and they spread this across you open the 2 pages. So this was a big part of this is I wanted things across a 2-page spread, because I've had more than my share of exercise books where too many pictures were on one page and I couldn't actually make out what was happening in the picture. So the table of contents is a hint of what's to come, in that it's not going to be a page at a time book. You're going to have to open the book across the 2 pages. Now, the order here, I found through giving talks that if I presented the anatomy, the biomechanics, and the sports medicine first,
you lose everyone.
Would glaze over, and I would lose the audience. And then I would say, and this is what it means for exercise. And then they would try to perk up, but they were already too far gone.
Right.
It was actually at one of the Discover Strength or Rec conferences, or maybe they called it HIT Resurgence, that I experimented with doing the exercises first and then explaining the anatomy and biomechanics. And that was received much better. Because you start with something that trainers are familiar with, exercises. And then you can split the hair and get into the nuances of it.
Yeah, stuff that's easy for people to consume and understand from the get-go, right?
Now, maybe if you're, like I did a podcast with biomechanics people from Biomechanics on Our Minds podcast. They were biomechanics people. So they wanted to talk about the biomechanics first and then relate it to exercise. And for them, it worked because that's what they dealt with every day. But for trainers and people who are exercising, the exercisers, which is who I wrote this for, start with the exercises and then get into the weeds. And so the first chapter is all text. So I'm just introducing the approach. And so in the dark blue, this is fun with PowerPoint, but the dark blue are the section headings. And underneath is the main point. Now I put section headings in because I know when I read exercise books, I don't read them like a novel.
Yeah.
I try to flip through, see a chunk of something I'm interested in. And then if I get something from that chunk, then I go ahead and buy the book.
Yeah.
So I chunked it up that way.
That's good. I used it like that as a reference more than a end-to-end read. Yeah.
That's right. So for the people who are just listening to this one, I'll just read a few of these. There are only so many ways you can load joints and muscles safely, whether you call it exercise, sports, or manual labor. And that's my way of saying that everything counts on your joints. And unfortunately, as trainers, we don't know what someone did before they walked in our door. If you have somebody with completely untouched joints, you can get away with a lot more before anything goes wrong, to the point where you might not even know it's going to go wrong, versus to someone who came in, they've had a very physically active lifestyle. So then the next section does what an exercise ask of your body match safe joint function and muscle capability, which to me is like the big neglected part in most exercise writing, where they just accept the exercise as given and then maybe they explain how to do it without ever reviewing whether you should be doing it or not.
Often there's
So
like much more safer and appropriate alternatives to what's being recommended is the issue.
some things, some exercises came about because they were things you could do with a barbell. That's not necessarily the
Right.
same as things you should do to your joints. All right. And then the next little bullet is assuming of, or any kind of boot camp is dismissing the possibility of getting injured. I've met more than my share of people who I see they're visibly in shape. I say, "Oh, congratulations, you look in shape." And they say, "Yes, I did such and such a boot camp." And I'd say, "I lost 20 pounds." And I say, "Are you still doing it?" "No, I tore a meniscus." "Train with me and I'll show you how to train. I won't tear your meniscus." "No, I really love the boot camp. I'll wait till this gets better and I'll go back." So obviously with that person, that type, that meant there is a mentality where they're either dismissive or they're young enough that they haven't had things hurt yet. So if somebody this is not an approach for somebody who doesn't care.
Indeed.
And then the next one, that this is a guide. Now,
Sorry, Bill. I just want to interject. Every time I get a text to join someone for five-a-side football, I think of you when I say no. Not because you're taking the joy of recreational activity away from me, but because I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I constantly think about if I am badly injured, it's going to make my life and their life so much harder. Yeah.
15 years ago, they started a local men's recreational softball league. And I hadn't played in 20 or 25 years. So I play, and every single game, I pull a hamstring or a calf muscle. Every single game. And I mentioned it to a physical therapist friend of mine, and he said, "Look, take this as a warning. I've got plenty of patients who were athletes in college. They stayed in shape. They stayed doing their sport. They hit 40, and all of a sudden they rupture an ACL or an Achilles." So he said, "So if you're pulling hamstrings and calves, that's very close to ACLs and Achilles."
Wow.
So I took his advice. I played one more fall. I turned to double play. I threw somebody out from the outfield, and I said, "Okay, I think I proved my point." It does take the fun out of doing stuff, but the consequences, especially as you get older, are much, much greater than when you're 20.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember Mike Bradley, who I had on the podcast, who I believe still is the strength and conditioning coach at Florida State University. Might have moved on now. I'm really not sure. I have to fact check that. But I was telling him about basketball and about getting injured. And I think he said like something, again, don't quote me on this, but it's something like, right around 34, 35, that's where the risk of rupturing an Achilles really starts to increase significantly, given your if you've played for a long period of your life or whatever. Depends on your mileage, I guess, as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably, definitely 40, definitely by 40.
Yeah. Yeah.
Noted decline at 40, but
I still shoot around. I still shoot around a little bit every now and again, but it's not. I'm not playing full court five-a-side as often.
there are certain pieces that you can't turn that competitive switch off on.
Mm-hmm.
Like playing softball, you either hit the ball or you don't, you either make the catch or you don't, you make the throw or you don't. But where I couldn't turn it off was base running. So I'd be at bat and I'd say, "Okay, wherever you hit this, you're stopping at first base." and I'd pull it to right field, and I'd be jogging to first, and I'd be, "Okay, this is good." And I'd see the right fielder missed it or bobbled it, and I'd say, "Ooh, I can take second." And that second, you turn on the gas, that's the mistake. Or you're on first and it hits the right field. "Oh, I can get to third. You can't throw me out of third. What are you doing?" So that's the thing I just could not turn off, that the base running switch. Disc golf and kayaking and riding a bike, it is.
Fair enough.
So anyway, so then in the section on what to expect, I point out that it's a guide, but it's not a guarantee. That other things that you can't control go into getting injured, but you shouldn't pretend that and you're just dismissive or ignorant of the risks. So you may not be in control if one of your tendons is frayed to almost having an injury, and you do something and it fully frays and now you have a torn tendon, but you are in control of your choice of exercises and how you do the exercises. So just because you can't control all of the risks doesn't mean you should control none of them. The ones you can, that's what this is about. Here's how to control them. And then I go into just basics of avoiding injury in your workout, where I elaborate any exercise. If you do it light enough, you're probably not getting hurt. And any exercise, if you do it heavy enough, and if it's a maximum limit, your chances go up of getting hurt. The all or nothing fallacy, right? There was a senior CrossFit champion quoted, they said that, I know there's a risk, I've been injured, I've had the surgeries, but the alternative is stay on the couch. That's all or nothing. That's not true.
Yeah.
You can be involved just short of being reckless. So
that's such a good point, because you hear so often, don't you, where those clients of ours and in strength training, they have this belief prior to obviously being introduced to our methods that injury or getting injured is just part of the process.
Right.
It just happens. You can't avoid it. You have to almost expose yourself to risk in order to actually get healthier or fitter, etc. Which maybe there is a small, tiny part of that that's somewhat true, but for the most part, you're in much more control of that than you think.
Actually, and I actually think there's some legal. One of the ways lawsuits get avoided in exercise and sports activities is physical change requires challenge, involves risks. Therefore, you assume all the risks. Now, I don't agree with that, because I think you can be doing something reckless, but it is out there that is part of. See, I just think there's a lower threshold, right? If you're doing exercise in a safe range of motion and controlling the weight and you get injured, okay, yes, something internally was happening that you weren't aware of, and that's the risk you take. On the other hand, if you're bouncing a barbell off your chest with people yelling at you to do one more, and you need 3 guys to get the bar off your chest, that's just reckless.
Said.
Anyway, and again, for the listeners, in the section Basics of Avoiding Injury in Your Workout, all or nothing fallacy, accidents, being aware of pre-existing conditions, and the appropriate activity. Stuff I did when I was 25, I cannot do at 65. Stuff someone does as a sports drill, you might reconsider continuing as you get older and your tissues get less pliable. Mostly more talk. No, actually, this is the second chapter is where I do the 5-star ratings, and headings in the middle there, exercise is missing piece. I discuss that most exercise, so to speak, in my day, it was magazines and books. Now it's social media posts and video. Most of it focuses on the sets, the reps, the time of the rep. But there's very little critical review of the exercises themselves, other than the writer's preference. Someone will say, oh, it's a great exercise, but without actually breaking down why it's a great exercise. And part of what I do is I break down, if I say it's a great exercise, it's because it meets some of these conditions, which are in the second heading, unseen aspects of exercise. That's where I talk about the moment arm created by the resistance in your body. I talk about the muscle torque curve, which every set of joints goes through. So I'm relating the things you can't see, and if they match, then I would say it's a good exercise. Let me just skip to the last heading, the caveat exercise, or that's where I basically say there's a whole other reasons why you can get injured other than your exercise selection. And especially if you're a professional trainer, someone walks in the door, you don't know, you can ask them, but they may not be relating something they had done to their body at the moment they walk in your door. So like I said, they could be on the verge of an injury anyway, and it just happens that it appears to have come from the exercise you gave them, but they may have had it if they went to the store and picked up a load of groceries or did something around their house. So you do have to accept there's a certain amount of this outside of your control. Now, on the screen, highlighted determining joint-friendly status. As I was doing this, I had to formalize my process. So I came up with these questions, which helped me identify whether I consider something a 1-star exercise, meaning risky with bad consequences, or 5-star, meaning very easy to manage. Is there an obvious external threat from the weight? Example, can it crush your spine, your face, your jaw, your throat? So that's an automatic 1-star. So if you're doing a barbell bench press or a barbell squat without any kind of rack around you or without a spotter, that's 1-star. Does the action of the exercise encourage you to lose your safe spine posture? Yes, would be 2 stars. So for instance, a
Mm-hmm.
where the action of the exercise encourages you to lose the safe spine spot posture. Can you avoid loading vulnerable positions of the other non-spine joints? No is 2 stars. Maybe with workarounds is 3 stars. And yes, with minimal adjustments would be a 5 stars. For instance, a barbell bench press without supports is 1 star. A barbell bench press with a power rack around you, so the bar can't crush you, would make it 3 stars. And a vertical chest press where the weight can't crush you, 5 stars. Is the exercise intended specifically to address posture and stabilization? I just arbitrarily made that 4 stars just as a way of including those exercises. And they're very manageable, so you're probably not going to get hurt doing them. And then, is the exercise mechanically hardest where the muscles are biomechanically strongest? In other words, is it congruent? So yes, with minimal adjustments makes a 5-star exercise. For example, an incline dumbbell curl. And yes, with workarounds, it's a 3-star exercise, so a standing curl.
I love this. Sorry, go ahead, Bill, before I comment.
Anyway, so, without formalizing, so I knew in my head what exercises I was comfortable coaching and doing and which ones I knew to be aware of. But I needed to sort out exactly how, like I wanted a methodology. I didn't want this just to be Bill's pet exercises.
Yes. This is so useful, I've found, for most of us should have or have an exercise library in our business. We want to have systems where the team can deliver workouts in a repeatable way. And when they're like designing programs or executing on a certain exercise of a client, they should be doing it the same way everyone else is, all right, in terms of the approach. And I think this is a great process for actually building that exercise library and deciding, giving you some filters and criteria on what exercises you actually include in that menu, in that library for your trainers to use. Or if you're just a personal trainer, you're working out what exercises you want to use with clients. And also for my own training, I'm really interested in obviously picking exercise that are the safest, but particularly the last point in terms of finding those that are hardest where the muscles are biomechanically strongest. That's also, for obvious reasons, really appealing. So it's been great in terms of just helping me learn about exercise. I didn't even realize that was the case, and then using those more in my routine. So I think this is one of the most powerful things from the book.
The other thing is, since not everybody is as ambitious with this stuff as I am, I wasn't intending the list of exercises here to be literal. If it's one of the 75 exercises not included in a book, I'm not implying anything about it, but you could take the same steps here and look at.
Sure. Yeah. You could put every exercise in the book. It would have been like a huge, thick encyclopedia.
Longer than it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that now to get to the meat of the rating. So here's an example, again, across 2 pages. This is hips and thighs, lower legs, mid and upper back. And then the following pages go into the chest, shoulder, arms, etc. Now, one thing about the visuals, there are 5 stars. The rating is 5 stars because Amazon, Best Buy, everybody uses 5 stars.
Indeed.
It was Autumn's idea to include grayed out stars to make it clear that if it was 1 out of 5.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it was 1 or just 3, if 1 dropped off, you wouldn't quite sure, is it 3 out of how many? So that visually works in print anyway. And so me personally, I stick with the 4 and 5 star exercises. For myself, I might do a 3 because I'm pretty comfortable that I can manage it. And I don't recommend anyone do a 1 or a 2, but part of how I hope people would use this is if they love barbell step-ups and they see I rated it a 1, instead of slamming the book and tearing it up and throwing it away, I would hope that they would turn to the barbell step-up page, see what the concerns are, and then decide if they can handle it. Mm-hmm. And if you can handle it bent arm pull over, P.S. you can't. But if you think you can, at least what the concerns are.
Yeah.
Barbell step up and bent arm pull over. I didn't include them because I endorse them or because I like them. I include them because they exist. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to point out what the issues were. However, those are documented as causing some incredibly severe injuries. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything in here pique your interest?
No, I just think it's good that you had to have exercise that you don't endorse and rate them accordingly in order to create in order to make sense of the 5-star. Like, you need to know the difference between these to give examples of both, I think, for it to all make sense, I think. So that was great that you did that.
I also think it's a fairer discussion than being the exercise police and
Yeah.
dictating what's good and what's bad, which of course I've been accused of by various trolls. But anyone who actually looks at this sees that there's a reason behind it. And if they take the time, they would see what those reasons are.
Yeah, and I know,
Lot to ask in the social media age.
oh, of course. And I know we've got colleagues and who have a difference of opinion on this very view we're looking at right now in terms of the safety, and maybe we can discuss some of that when we get into.
They're entitled to their opinion, even if they're wrong, but that's okay. We'll get into being wrong and right later. But
Sounds
anyway,
good.
yeah. So this, again, hopefully people use this as not as another page in a novel, but in terms of, gee, what does he say about this?
Yeah,
I
very
included kettlebell swings, which I don't like, but if you are going to do them, here's what you should be aware of. And I also didn't include, other than say a couple of Nautilus machines, I didn't include anything too esoteric or anything too new to the market, just because I wanted stuff people had access to.
Yeah. Oh, and also, sorry, just for those listening, what we're looking at right now is just a list of some of the exercises in the book and the star ratings for each one of those. So that varies all the way from up to 5 stars down to 1 star. So there's just an overview of the ratings before we get into the actual specifics on each exercise.
And for the listeners, for instance, in the hips and thighs area, right? The freehand squat and a Nautilus Nitro leg press are 5 stars compared to a barbell step up, which is 1 star, or a stiff knee deadlift, which is 2 stars.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite exercise to hate, the weighted hip thrust, which is also 2 stars. And then in the mid and upper back, a parallel grip pull down and a chest supported row are 5 stars, and bent arm pullover 1 star with a free weight. Straight elbow pullover 2 stars. And again, later in the book, this is a snapshot. Later in the book, I explain why. More fun with PowerPoint. The book doesn't look this pretty. Anyway,
Stop being so self-deprecating, Bill.
It's
just deliver.
It's self-hatred. It's not self-deprecating. This is the visual guide. It's the biggest chapter because it's all 2-page spreads, with a little bit of text explaining what's to come. For the listeners, that the names of the exercises don't imply anything about the relative safety or productivity of the exercise. It's how you do the exercise that counts. And if you don't know the positions to avoid and the reasons why to avoid them, it's easy to slip into them and inadvertently add wear and tear and risk. Each exercise is demonstrated with 4 pictures: an extreme start, an optimal finish, and an extreme finish. And that joint-friendly fitness happens between the 2 optimal positions. This will make much more sense right here.
There you go.
Seated heel raise. Now, not because this is such a significant exercise, but because it's clear. You can see on each picture, the X's and the checks are very visible. If the pictures work for somebody, stop there. But underneath each picture are some bullet points with some notes and tips about each picture. And then underneath that, there is paragraphs in what I hope are full sentences elaborating on the actual exercise. This is just the exercise. The anatomy, biomechanics, sportsman is a separate chapter. So in this one with the seated heel raise, you see what I consider an extreme start where my ankle cannot bend anymore. The knees are far in front of the feet, which is classically contraindicated in spite of what else is on the internet.
How is it contraindicated?
In this particular case, you're stretching the ankle and the Achilles as far as it can go. So as well as you're putting a lot of stress on the bottom of the foot. Now, there may not be, and with all of this stuff, there may not be an instant gunshot type injury. What I'm mainly talking about is you can have that instant injury based on what the person did before they came to you. But for the most part, we're talking about adding unnecessary wear and tear. So in my case, like I've had flat feet my whole life. And whenever I tried to do calf work, the bottoms of my feet would burn far earlier than my calves and then ache for days because I was following the classic muscle magazine stuff of getting that extreme stretch at the ankle and trying to raise up on toes, all of which puts a lot more stress on the bottom of the foot than you need to exercise the calves.
So when you have arches, it somewhat dissipates that force or distributes it differently?
The arch is its support. And when you have flat feet, all of those ligaments are stretched out.
Got it. Yeah.
And then the bones collapse. The structure collapses where if people who have an arch, the arch itself, if you see a bridge, what people would call an overpass, you might see blocks arranged in an arch.
Yeah.
And that's because the arch structure itself provides the support. But in case of flat feet, that person, for whatever reason, no longer has an arch. And so the bones and everything just collapse.
Right.
Okay. So everything holding that together has to work extra hard.
That's a great analogy. Also, I know you already described this, but just to make it really clear for those just listening, all we're looking at now is a double spread in joint friendly fitness of Bill performing the seated heel raise. And there's 4 images, 2 that show bad start and finish positions, and 2 that show optimal start and finish positions. And this is a seated heel raise with a dumbbell held at the knees. So again, go to YouTube or go to, I think we're on other social media platforms too, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., to watch this. But otherwise, continue listening and we'll do it as best we can to describe what we're talking about.
Well, yeah. So now the middle 2 pictures are really all the range you need to exercise the soleus. And then that final picture, the extreme finish, is me attempting to go up as high on my toes as I can.
Look at those calves, Bill.
Looks very cool. I got it. Yeah. It looks
beautiful set of calves on yourself there.
And considering how little calf work I've done, it shows you how this stuff works.
Indeed.
But interesting point though, the position you put yourself in to display the muscle isn't necessarily, if you load it, friendly to the joint. So a number of the biomechanics books I have, that when they would do photography, they would have the person really contort themselves to make a muscle pop for demonstration purposes. And that's the case here, right? The left side pictures, there's really not much happening, but in the right side where I'm trying to raise on the toes, you can see the outer head of the gastroc, you can see the soleus. However, trying to do that regularly would just kill my feet. And I'm going to assume most people with flat feet.
Okay, so that's the main issue here with the extreme finish, going right up on the toes on the calf raise. It's not great if you've got flat feet, or is there other issues?
As you're trying to, what happens is the gastroc and the soleus pull on the heel, which moves the foot around the ankle. When you try to rise up on your toes, your gastroc and soleus, especially your gastroc, isn't contracting here effectively. But when you try to rise up on your toes, your heel has moved as far as it can move. And to rise up on your toes, your foot is trying to bow more. Think of a ballerina when they're up on their toes. Their foot itself is arched. It's not held straight like a lever. So it's trying to arch that foot that extra bit that is what causes the problem. Because you never have to do that in real life unless you're a ballerina.
Got it.
And ballerinas have foot problems. Oh, by the way, also notice that this is the side I have the ruptured triceps on, which is impressively vacant in this. I wasn't flexing. Yeah, that's for sure, Bill. I wasn't
Everything's flexed. In every picture.
Gritting my teeth. But no, this is the side that I ruptured the triceps on. That started.
Oh, it looks good.
The other side looks better. Started the whole journey, by the way. Okay, now back on track. Barbell squat.
Yeah.
Demonstration weight. But this brings up a couple of things that repeat, which is in the extreme left, the X position, loading the spine in flexion. You can see the curve in my lower back is completely reversed. It's away from the belly, not towards the belly. And then in the far right, where I've gone past what I consider to be the top of the exercise, and I've locked out my knees and I've dropped my hips back, that's the sway back posture. And in the spine health material, loading into flexion and sway back are clearly contraindicated because the spine bears loads best through its neutral curves. So towards the front, towards the back, towards the front. And sway back and loading the spine in flexion completely contradicts that. Sway back, by the way, when people are trying to gather themselves for another rep in the squat, they automatically lock their knees and try to relax to gather themselves. Mm-hmm. So the things you do to get more reps out of a barbell squat are not necessarily the best things to do for your spine. And when we go to the next slide, so here's a much clearer view of the lumbar spine curves. She's doing.
Is this your wife?
No, this is Cindy.
Oh, sorry.
You take that back.
I apologize.
Don't let my
There's
wife.
just so many people involved in this book, I forget.
Fortunately, they're all friends or relatives. So now this is Cindy, and with this type of barbell and the fact that she pays a lot of attention to her spine curves, it's a good visual. Again, on the left, loading the spine in flexion, right? She's completely lost the curve compared to that very adjacent picture where the curve in the lumbar spine is intact. And then again, on the far extreme, where she's slipped into sway back in order to give the muscles a bit of a break. However, the stress is now going on the spine.
Which is what people do. It's just for those listening again, we're now looking at the barbell deadlift in the same format. So 4 images, 2 showing extreme start and finish, which aren't advisable, and then optimal start and finish, and the notes below. And what we're seeing there at 12D extreme finish, that's what a lot of people do, right? When they hit the top of the deadlift, they thrust out, they thrust their pelvis forward. Right. And that's, I just didn't always really truly understand why that was contraindicated. But I always felt like you took tension off some of the musculature as well when you did that. Yeah.
And there's a certain, so now here is where I diverge, conflict, however you characterize it, with conventional weight training, right? Mm-hmm. There is something very gratifying about locking out in an exercise. You strain, I got to lock out. And there is something gratifying. It does mark the end of the rep. And at least my age, we started this stuff lifting weights. And so that becomes what we did at 15 or whatever in the high school weight room or in our 20s. That locks in as the way to do it, right? But if you look at this through, again, the spine material, sway back is a contraindicated. Sway back is contraindicated as a posture, much less with 300-pound barbell on your hands. Now, this obviously isn't a 300-pound barbell. This is a demonstration barbell. And this also isn't a competition deadlift. So if somebody wants to competitively deadlift, as with any other sport, you assume the risks and the consequences, and that's your call. Mm-hmm. But for someone just using the deadlift for the glutes or for the lifting practice, you would only go as low as you can maintain your lumbar curve and only go as high and stop before sway back. One of my interns, Emily, who worked for Roger Schwab after me, by the way, she was here. She goes, "You mind if I do some deadlifts?" And I said, "Well, okay, let's see what you do." And she was flawless. She only went as low as her back curve. Without my coaching, she was flawless. And I said, if this is how you're doing deadlifts, then I would say if your back ever starts to hurt, this is where the problem is. But until that happens, you're doing everything the way you're supposed to do it. Or if you're going to do it, how to do it.
Tell me briefly, if you use the optimal start, optimal finish positions that you advocate, why would one potentially experience back pain, in your opinion, from doing deadlifts? What would be happening there?
For instance, the spine, the discs have age-related deterioration. Outside of your workouts, you have a manual job, you did a sport, and you've beaten up your back. If you moved wrong outside of the gym and you have herniated discs that are on the verge of flaring up, and then you use perfect form, it's external perfect form, but it's not internally perfect. You don't know internally what's happening at the level of the discs. As much as we'd like to think we're this experiment where everything outside is controlled and the only thing that affects our bodies is what we do in the gym, the reality of it is everything you do physically affects your body.
That's
it's the
so
same body when you walk into the gym. All of a sudden, you don't wave a magic wand and, okay, this is exercise. This isn't going to hurt.
Yeah.
And again, in my training experience, a lot of times when people don't come to me because they hurt their back deadlifting or doing something big. They hurt their back because they tied their shoes or they reached for something wrong.
Yeah.
So they didn't hurt their back then. They had hurt their back prior and it was cumulative. And that was the thing that pushed it over. And that's why caveat exerciser, right? Stuff you do outside counts. You could be on the verge of injuring yourself, do everything perfectly in the gym, and that's what puts you over. Or maybe I'm supposed to say, no, if you do what Bill DeSimone says, you'll stay injury-free for life.
No, so
I forgot.
No,
Social
no.
media. I forgot.
Yeah, we'll just edit that out. Don't worry. No. Okay, so am I right in saying then that if you are someone where your back does start to hurt, or you think that maybe you already have some disc issues, that actually, and I know we might not explore it today, but I know you have alternative lower back exercises that people can do that are probably way safer and still recruit the lumbar.
Don't worry. Don't worry. We're going to explore the spine a little bit later. Don't worry.
Okay, got it.
I would, yeah. We'll leave that for later.
Sounds good.
But this deadlifting and squatting would work so much better if the spine was a solid column.
Right.
That's not what we have here. It functions as a column, but it's not a column. Right? It's individual vertebrae, muscles, ligaments, etc.
Today's episode is sponsored by Imagine Strength, the game changer in safe, simple, and effective high-intensity training machines. When it comes to HIIT, Imagine Strength is your go-to for intelligently designed, efficient, and affordable equipment. Their team is passionate about HIIT, and it shows in every piece they craft. So why are Imagine Strength the right choice? Number one, they tailor-make their equipment for HIIT studios. Number two, they provide cost-effective solutions for your business. And number three, they are committed to ongoing innovation and refinement. Ready to take your HIIT business to the next level? Visit imaginestrength.com to discuss your needs and find the perfect gear for your studio. Join the HIIT revolution of Imagine Strength and transform your workout experience today. Let's go. Yep, got it.
Yes. The Nautilus Nitro leg press. I included this deliberately because you and Tim Ryan were talking about the leg press one time, and a listener had asked you, what about raising off the seat in the leg press?
Yes.
You did mention my name, and Tim said wasn't familiar with my instruction.
Yes. So this entire part was inspired by that comment?
No, just including it here was inspired by a client. I had done this book years ago.
Oh, I see. I see.
Including it today.
Oh, that's not quite as cool. Okay.
Now you tell yourself that.
I appreciate the clarification, Bill. Continue. Yes.
So no, the reason for lifting off the seat, it's not to lift off the seat, it's to match the curves in your spine with the curves in this particular seat back.
Got it.
Nautilus at the time, and I don't know if they still do it, so this is 2005 or 6, they built curves in the seat back that matched the curves in your spine. Genius idea, but they didn't draw attention to it in the instruction, and they didn't give you a way of accommodating it. So in this picture, if you notice in the optimal pictures, there are two pads under my daughter. The curves line up. If I personally leg press, I don't use the pads. I just I just sit myself with some space between my butt and the seat, and the curves in my back fit into the seat. And it's not at the flattest angle, because when you do that, you feel like you're sliding off the seat. It's up one notch so that you're not going to go anywhere. Now, notice in the extreme start position, the seat back is up more vertically, and her knees are pressing up against, her thighs are pressing against her ribs. Her lower back is flipped, her hips have flipped, her lower back is flattened. See, I consider this a bad start for the hips are being crowbarred. The lower back is loaded in flexion, and it's not very comfortable. And I know others in the high intensity community think this is the place you start leg presses. I have my biomechanic reasons why not to start them here. Mm-hmm. I'm open to hear their argument, but the optimal start and the optimal finish, covering the angle for peak muscle torque for the quads, you're almost there for the glutes, and you're not crowbarring the hip, and you're not flattening the spine.
Can we just talk about crowbarring the hip and compression at the knee here? Is that okay to discuss that at this point?
Yeah, this isn't a great example of compression at the knee, but
okay. But we can talk about that, because it's good rather than saving it till later when you've actually got a real good example here. Yeah.
So here's the kneecap.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Here's a kneecap. Here's a quad. Here's your shin.
Got it.
Okay. And the force from the quad goes through the kneecap to the shin. And what the kneecap does in a more vertical, the quad, and here's the force. So what the kneecap does is it creates a moment arm in the knee. So you can live without a kneecap, but your quads are very weak, because instead of acting through a moment arm, it goes right over the center of the kneecap, and your quads just aren't that strong. So when the femur and the shin are at an open angle, the kneecap does its job and it deflects the force away from the center of the knee.
I see.
But the more acute the angle, so here's a femur and here's a tibia.
Bill is currently now drawing on his tiny whiteboard that he has ready for these questions, which is wonderful.
Damn, I am.
Yeah.
So now when the
It's Picasso right now.
When the
It's like the
angle
peasant's
is-
hands. Sorry, go on, Bill.
when the angle is acute, now the kneecap, it's doing its job, but it's not really deflecting. Your quads are pulling this way, the resistance is pulling this way. It's pulling the kneecap into the center of the knee.
Mhm.
That's the compression. So the difference between here and here is compression. Here, the kneecap is deflecting the force, creating a moment arm. But here, it's still deflecting the force, but the forces are pulling the kneecap into the knee. Now, for instance, if anyone's a runner and they look at the sports medicine articles, the runners are the running world is very up on knee discomfort, knee pain, chondromalacia, etc.
Mhm.
All right. So in just running, you have a lot of wear and tear on the kneecap. Imagine what happens if you then bend it back as far as you can. And now again, the forces are pulling the kneecap into the knee as opposed to it just deflecting. Now, in this exercise, that's not a real prominent problem. The crowbarring at the hip. So if
Can you just lift the board up a little higher and you're doing the
so side view of the hip, and now here's a femur, okay?
got it.
And now, and you're facing this way. And so now the femur comes up to here, as in that first picture. And now instead of being over here, the femur is like this. The force is pushing your femur this way, and it's like a crowbar effect right at the hip joint.
I see.
Okay. The difference between someone sitting here in a leg press, and now this crowbar is acting against the femur here and being here, right? Now you have a little bit of space. You have some space for the femur to travel before you're actually impinging at the hip.
I see. Okay.
And it almost literally is a crowbar because the femur is obviously one of the longest bone in the body, right? And so that you take that longest bone in the body. But crowbar works like this, right? You have the long effort end and a very short resistance end. And here is a lot of pressure. And so now when you have a hip socket and a femur, here's the effort end, here's the resistance end, and here's where all the pressure is, where the femur hits the hip socket.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah. So this again, this thing, we really talking about the issues that Bill presents in having the knees as close to the chest as possible at the start of a leg press. And obviously that can result in this crowbar effect at the hip, which is very interesting. I had not thought about it like that before. So yeah, that's awesome, Bill. Thank you. Okay.
And also part of so now what the body will do, by the way, so again, looking this way here.
But Bill, I do these things and I have no problems.
Yeah.
Yet. Okay.
What happens too, by the way, is when the hip is being crowbarred like this, here's your lower back, here's your butt, here's your femur. As the hip is being crowbarred like this, in order to relieve this discomfort, the body is going to flatten out the curve in the lumbar spine. So your body is not going to sit there and be absorbing all this pain in one spot. Your body's going to shift to get away from the pain. And that's when the lumbar spine goes from the normal curve to pitching over.
I see.
To flipping back the other way. And before anyone points it out, yes, I'm very aware that the Medix lumbar leg press builds that curve wrong into their seat, and I still don't know why.
The Medix what? Which machines build it wrong?
The Medix leg press, their seat is built this way.
Okay. Can you describe for those listening as well?
It's, again, if your lumbar curve goes towards your belly, their seat is built so that there would be space between the lumbar curve and the seat. And so your body fills that in.
Yeah, sure.
Now, and again, I know why I would protect the lumbar curve. I'm not sure why they would encourage turning it the other way. They may have a reason that I'm just not aware of.
Sure. Bill, I'm just thinking, I think we should break this into two parts because I think we got a ton more to cover and we should record a part 2 to cover the rest. Is that okay? Yeah, great. Do you want to we'll finish on this slide though, before we wrap up, but do you want to just share any final thoughts on this slide before we wrap?
My daughter. Anyway, but actually, why don't we just quickly go through the rest? We don't have to talk a lot about them.
Yeah, let's do it. Sounds good.
Sabrina on the pullover in Adam's place in New York City. My son, with me inflicting the barbell decline press on him. Another one, Dad, this hurts. Yeah, no. Silas is demonstrating incline curls.
Silas has worked out before. / has good genetics.
Yes. Yeah, he came pretty much at a moment's notice. Yeah, I need somebody. Okay, thanks. My wife on the triceps press downs.
Excellent. She's in great shape. Again, sorry, Bill, just again for the listeners, I think what we've talked about there in terms of all the details about the optimal and extreme start and finish positions, that is all detailed for all exercises for everyone. We're now skipping through at a more rapid rate. So just keep that in mind. It's much more detailed. We're just skipping through. Yeah.
And in the book, it's 70 of them. We're not talking the entire book.
It's excellent.
And triceps press down. This is a spine extension over a BOSU, again, with my daughter. The flow chart that I use to sort through the biomechanics material to end up at exercise material. Graphics by Autumn, again, because I gave her a scribble. Headings of the basic biomechanics section. Spine stuff, more spine stuff. I included the weekly routines for anyone. If someone has a routine that works for them, the number of days a week they work out, etc., all they might have to do if they want to make it easier on their joints is tweak their performance. On the off chance somebody wants to start from scratch or is looking for a change, I included routines. But again,
I love this. Everyone has to have a routine, Bill.
It's not meant to be read as a novel, but and these are, by the way, very influenced by Ellington Darden, because that was formative. And I also happen to think in this aspect, he was very right. Certainly more right than a lot of stuff that came later.
And Ross, great. You've got, just go back one. In fact, we're almost at the end of the slideshow, so we might as well just keep it all in the one episode, aren't we, Bill?
Well, not really, but go ahead.
How many more slides do we have? Just remind me, roughly.
Actually, you're right. It's not too many.
Yeah, if you've got time, I've got time. If that's all right with you. So I just wanted to comment though. One of the things I like about this chapter is you've got the different routines, example routines based on what someone has access to. So if they only have body weight and nothing else, if they have a small amount of equipment, small gear, if they've got free weights, if they've got access to machines and stations, and then you've got to create your own. So you've got, just make sure you're hitting these muscle groups. And this is so helpful, even for someone like me. And I sound like I'm more knowledgeable and experienced than I am, but for someone who's read a lot of Darden's stuff and read a lot of books in our space, I still was reading this thinking, okay, what do I actually do? I was like, I want a routine. And so it was great to see this. Yeah.
See, now that I find that comment fascinating.
Really?
Because I've been doing this too long. And putting together a routine, I've been doing that from the 70s. And a little bit of stuff pre-Darden, but Darden, that stuff really connected with me. So whenever a younger trainer says, what kind of routine you put together, I have to take myself back. Like, I can't put myself in the shoes of not knowing what routine to use. But I've gotten this response enough that I made a point of including it. Also, on the sample weekly schedules, I ripped this idea off from, I don't know if you're aware of the old Health for Life material. It was a 90s publication.
Had it mentioned.
90s publication, a guy named Jerry Robinson. Liked it at the time. Don't think it really holds up all that well in the biomechanics piece of it. But then again, I don't think anybody holds up all that well in the biomechanics piece. But they did include a section where they said, look, if this type of athlete you are, here's how you should arrange your week. So I said, all right, that's actually not bad, right? Yeah, I've had people who are into yoga come here. I have executives, weekend warriors, etc. So just giving Sunday to Saturday, here's how to plan your week, exercise-wise.
Yeah, that's great.
Let's run. Here's the bibliography.
Tons of citations. Good to see.
So I included the bibliography not because I'm defending a PhD, okay, but because I wanted to show that there's a bit of a method here, just like with those questions. Many of these books, as tempting as it was to have the intern just give me 1,000 references to include, and we actually use these. A lot of these books I had open in front of me as I was understanding the concepts myself and then trying to communicate them appropriately. And some of this stuff was confirming in that when I first had interns from Rutgers, I said, here's what I'm working on. Tell me where I'm wrong. And they said, basically, no, this looks good. I said, well, all right. This was Emily who went to work for Roger. I said, Emily, I only use Google to search. You use the academic database in Rutgers. And so she Googled exercise and injury, or not Google, she searched exercise and injury. She says, we have a problem. There are 660,000 hits for exercise and injury. So we narrowed it down. We took out sports. We took out gender differences. We took out age differences. We took out stuff that, as much as we could, that didn't have to do with the exercises being associated with a particular injury.
Mm-hmm.
And we still had far more, hundreds of thousands of hits. So we just selected a bunch that particularly relevant. So these are, again, from the academic literature, describing shoulder instability in a weight training population, describing injuries among weightlifters and powerlifters, upper extremity weightlifting injuries.
Can you speak on some of the main outcomes from these studies? Like, where was the convergence? High level, obviously, it's hard for you to probably remember the studies specifically.
The general point is that, so for instance, if you look at a study and it says subject was doing a barbell press and got a spasm in their back and then their scapula started to wing. So the scapula pops out. If you look at that and you say, I use a Nautilus overhead press, this doesn't apply to me. That's not the way I looked at it.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at, okay, what mechanism do they think happened here? So if they associate pushing overhead with scapulohumeral rhythm, and that got overloaded, and that's why a particular muscle went into spasm and caused the scapula to wing. What I took away from it is, it's not the barbell press at fault, or a dumbbell press, or a machine press. It's the internal mechanism that helps you do that. So what I was looking for in these things was what was happening internally that these exercises prompted the injury. And that's what was in common. It's the anatomy and the biomechanics. That's the one thing in common, whether you use machines or free weights, is your anatomy and your internal biomechanics.
So you don't advise pushing overhead for the most part? Is that accurate?
No, that's a little simplistic.
Got it.
Because I do include overhead presses in here.
Okay.
But moving your arm overhead is a lot more complicated internally than it looks external.
I see. So
even though a barbell press is a classic conventional weight training exercise, when you look in the sports injuries guidebook and you read about shoulder impingement, you see how a barbell press can end up being problematic. Or when you look in basic biomechanics and musculoskeletal system, and the far right page describes scapulohumeral rhythm. So what looks like, oh, this is a basic move, just push overhead, from 0 to about 90 degrees, your humerus moves in the shoulder joint. The rotator cuff holds the head of the humerus in position. The deltoid contracts. But from 90 to about, as the diagram shows, the scapula has to move on the... So the serratus pulls the bottom of the scapula forward. The top of the trapezius pulls the top of the scapula towards the center. So now the whole socket has to turn upward. And now when you want to go over 110 degrees, either you're arching your back to give the illusion of moving overhead, straightforward, and now it gets more complicated. And now if you really want to go overhead, you have to arch your back, because this angle doesn't really change, but the back arch makes it look like you're going overhead.
Sure.
Or if you're using one arm at a time, you lean to give the effect.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't really have that great of motion cleanly in the shoulder.
Mm.
And if you're using a barbell press or pull down or a chin and your shoulders are rising up. So this motion is what the sports medicine calls the humerus migrating upward.
And this is a bad thing?
Yes.
I see.
For instance, if you're a baseball pitcher and you're throwing overhand, at some point, fatigue, years, what have you, the humerus migrates upward. I'm just trying to make the YouTube viewers say. The humerus migrates upward and creates the impingement, like that page from Sports Injury Guidebook indicates. It could be throwing a baseball overhand. It could be a tennis overhand. It could be a volleyball player overhand. It also could be hanging rock bottom from a chin up and letting all your weight settle into
Oh, interesting.
the humerus migrating upward position. It could be doing a pull down through the extreme range. And again, I would stop somebody here, but I had, and many of us do this, so that they have to do 2 motions to come back down.
So just to paint a picture again for the listeners. So we're talking about as that humerus migrates upward, it really creates a tight space between the acromion and the top of the humerus, doesn't it? Which that can cause that impingement. All those sort of tendons don't have much room to move through. That's essentially what impingement syndrome is, correct?
Essentially, but that's not complete, right? Because everything is so close. So everything is so close in there. There's a lot of other things people could name, and people can say, "Oh, they got it wrong because they forgot about the bursa." No, we didn't forget about the bursa. It's just that there's so many different things. That's why you have textbooks, so that you can look up what those different things are. So, for instance, they're looking at the acromion, the coracoacromial ligament, the supraspinatus muscle and tendon, the subacromial bursa. Those are all the things that can get impinged, inflamed, etc., or get involved.
Yeah. It's amazing it's really interesting that what you said there about how hanging could potentially be a culprit. Because I've actually been doing some hanging, and there's a theory. I haven't finished the book. I've got the book by John Kirsch. Hang on a second. I'm going to re-get the title. 1 second. So it's this one. You seen this, Bill? Can you see that clearly?
Yes, I can. I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, it's called Shoulder Pain, The Solution and Prevention. It's written by an MD, board-certified orthopedic surgeon called John Kirsch. I don't know, again, the reputation of this book and how fringe it might be, and I haven't finished reading it, so take this with a grain of salt. But part of the solution is that hanging is good for shoulder health. But what you're saying here might actually contradict that. So yeah, I don't know if you've already explained it, but I don't know if you have any more thoughts.
Well, context does matter. And shoulder impingement clearly leads to oleitises. If you continue to impinge your shoulder, I guess the issue, you'll always find someone who says, I do exactly the opposite of what the conventional wisdom is, and I'm doing better.
Sure.
And maybe for that individual, that's true, because in shoulder rehab, there is a role for stretching the shoulder. And if whoever that book is written with in mind has that particular condition, then maybe it would help. But I guess my point with all of this stuff in joint-friendly fitness is, if you know these are mechanisms of injury and you are choosing what to do in the gym, then don't choose the things that. Let me rephrase that. The classic way of handling stuff is you do whatever you want to do until things start to hurt. And then when things start to hurt, then you get very interested in sports medicine and how things work. So the classic thing to do is, again, do it if it helps. But if at some point if at some point after doing what you thought had been helping, that joint hurts, so you know where to look. So look, that's what I did in my teens and 20s. In my teens, I was more influenced by the muscle magazines, and we did all sorts of excessive weight stuff. And then 20s, I was very influenced by Nautilus and Menser and Darden. And I did my interpretation of high intensity training, which was probably a little bit over the top, as many of my contemporaries were doing. And it was only when I ruptured the biceps and triceps at 40 that I thought I'd probably revisit this. There just didn't seem to be a need prior to actually getting hurt. I've gotten this from Richard Winnett. I've gotten this from Al Coleman, guys who at first coming across my material were dismissive of it. And then as their joints got more experience, they came back and said, oh, there's something here, isn't there? Yeah. Again, if it seems to help, it helps, great. But if it doesn't help, if something seems to be not working, you know where to look. In this particular slide from Sports Injuries Guidebook, we have shoulder impingement, and we also have the posterior cruciate ligament tear. This is earlier we talked about knees over toes, which is another fad on the internet where they're claiming that loading the knees over the toes is the best thing you can do for knee health. And again, I disagree. When you bend your knee as far as it can, so your calf is fully pressed into your hamstring, so you drop straight down in a rock bottom squat, You do a lunge and you allow your knee to come very far forward of your knee.
Mm-hmm.
The posterior cruciate ligament's job is to hold the knee together in that direction. And as long as it does its job, everything is fine. How posterior cruciate ligaments tear in sports is you get tackled and you land on your shin, and all the weight from your femur presses down against your shin, and that's what tears the posterior cruciate ligament. So it's like in a tackle or in a car accident, if your feet get driven underneath you. So the mechanism for injuring the posterior cruciate ligament is loading that fully flexed knee position. And I don't mean a half squat. Here's your femur and here's your shin, right? So here's your knee and here's your toes, and the muscles on none of the quads, the hamstrings, none of the muscles are near peak torque. So they're not protecting your knee. It's predominantly the posterior cruciate and the other ligaments. And that's in addition to the compression at the knee. So again, I think this builds a case to not regularly load the knee in that position.
Got it. Okay.
Again, you can, but then if your knee starts to bother you, that's where you would look.
Understood.
Let's see here. From basic biomechanics of the musculoskeletal system, I first stumbled onto this textbook with Tom Purvis's material because he recommended this as a reference. And I never took Tom Purvis's courses, but I did buy his references. So the right side diagram shows scapulohumeral rhythm. The middle diagram in the middle of the page shows disc pressures on the spine under different conditions. So there's upright, and then there's various reclines. And the least amount of negative pressure on the discs is at 110-degree angle with the lumbar support. So
that's the C, option C, is it?
D.
Oh,
D. See that black?
Oh, I see.
Black mark, that's the lumbar support. So that's the absent lumbar support, it would be C.
Yeah.
A vertical bench, straight 90 degrees to the floor, puts the most pressure on the lumbar, on the disc, in a negative way. And the 110-degree angle is easiest. So any recommendation I have, the incline bench is always set not 90, but as close to the 110-degree mark as you can.
Got it.
Hygiene. It's a hygiene. It's not like it's going to save an injury. It's a hygiene type.
Yeah.
Brunstrom's Clinical Kinesiology. This an earlier edition was one of the first books I used. If you're not actively in school, some of the older versions actually present the material a little clearer, just because they use the drawings and photos rather than digital photography, digital images. They tend to get a little wordier, the more editions they have. On the right is a diagram of the carrying angle at the elbow, which is involved in curls and other arm flexion. So for instance, the old Nautilus warning about don't use an easy curl bar, use a straight bar. The straight bar, you're fighting the carrying angle. And the straight bar, it's positioning your hands in supination. Your biceps doesn't have to create the supination as it would with a dumbbell. So the easy curl bar accommodates the carrying angle. And anecdotally, probably every 40-year-old bodybuilder switches at some point from barbell curls to an easy bar or dumbbells because their elbows bother them. The carrying angle is part of the reason.
Got it.
This middle diagram here shows length tension relationship in muscle. And so counterintuitively, the left side of the graph is shortened. And as you move to the right, the muscle's getting stretched. Okay. So we tend to think of the beginning of the exercise being the stretch position and then moving into shortened. But they're looking at percentages of length. So the closer you get to 0% length or the lower numbers, that's shortened. So what this diagram shows is that when it comes to muscle, when you start at the shortest length and you stretch it a bit, you get into the useful range where the amount of tension it generates peaks. Stretch it past that, the amount of tension it generates drops. And then as extreme stretch, the tension spikes because it's trying not to break. And then past that, it breaks. Now, in the old muscle magazines and in more current hit, influencer, what have you, they used to say the stretch position biomechanics shows the stretch position is best at working your muscles, or however they phrase it, generates the most tension. But what that does is the stretch position in a biomechanics textbook means stretched from its most shortened, not stretched to the point of breaking. And a lot of exercises, a dumbbell fly, for instance, chest fly, when you're lying on your back and your dumbbells are coming back behind you, you're long past the useful range of the pectorals and you're headed towards
Doom.
breaking range.
Yeah.
Okay. So that different use of the phrase for stretching has been around for 50 years, where the stretch position in the biomechanics textbooks is not the same as the stretch position of an exercise. Let's see here. Now this is one of my favorite papers. So I have never, having read a lot of this, the Nautilus stuff, bodybuilding stuff, back to the 70s. The cam and the strength curve has always been very prominent concern in the Nautilus, in the Nautilus discussion, high intensity discussion. But I read what Jones had to say about it. I read what Hutchins had to say about it. But I thought there were inconsistencies in how they claimed to derive the cam, and they never provided any references for how they shaped the particular cam. And if you are familiar with 50-year-old Nautilus, the cams have gone from small at the beginning of a curl to only getting bigger as you move to the end of the curl, to more kidney bean shaped. And then you have David come along with the drastic fall off, David exercise equipment in the 80s and 90s, where they came across with this drastic fall off to the cam. So there are a lot of inconsistencies in the in the derivation of here's how we come up with a cam, and very little reference. In the biomechanics literature, however, there's a lot of reference on the profile of how the muscle expresses torque around the joint. And they may not be 100% consistent with each other, but there's a definite pattern. The pattern is somewhat predictable. And what I wrote in Moment Arm Exercise and Congruent and touched on and Joint Friendly is if the cam effect, if it matches how your muscles express torque around the joint, you only feel effort, you don't feel a lockout, and you don't feel a sticking point. And it's a very efficient exercise because you're working through most of the range of motion, compared to when you feel a distinct sticking point and you work hard as hell to get through the sticking point and then nothing, right? So when it's efficient, it's all effort through the length of the rep. And when there's a sticking point, it's a lot of effort, a rest. A lot of effort, a rest. Anyway, so in the biomechanics literature, you find a lot of muscle torque curves for different joint movements with reference. And this paper summarizes them and basically comes up with predictive torque equations for joints of the extremities. And the graphs in the middle of the page correspond to the exercises on the right-hand column. In the upper left, where we see a peak curve, that's arm flexion, obviously different curl exercises, showing a peak torque at around 70 or 80 degrees. So your biceps are strongest somewhere, if that's 90, somewhere in this range. To the right of that, elbow extension, a triceps press down. And again, so they're going by the 0 is at the left. So it's not necessarily the beginning of the exercise. So on the right, that elbow extension, the beginning of the exercise is the 120-degree mark. So your elbows are bent. Your elbows are bent at about 120 degrees. And then as you move right to left, your elbows are getting less bent. So what this shows is, again, somewhere in the middle range is where the peak muscle, somewhere in the middle range is peak muscle torque for the triceps. Diagrams below that are front raise or bench press. Then we have pull downs or a straight arm pull down. Below that, we have leg curl, knee flexion, and leg extension, knee extension. And then the bottom two are hip flexion and hip extension. So again, the point being, there's no real mystery. Muscle torque isn't malleable. If muscle torque was malleable, it would change to accommodate a bad cam as well as a good cam, and you would never know the difference. So for instance, if a dumbbell side raise exercise, everyone, everywhere, always, it is always hardest right here. You can handle a ton of weight at the bottom. You can't handle a ton of weight out here, a bad cam. But no matter how many years you do that exercise, it is always hardest over here. The muscle torque of the shoulders doesn't change to accommodate the bad cam. because if it could, it would change and you wouldn't know it was a bad cam. So that, by the way, is why rather than go into the equipment design business, I decided to work with conventional equipment and simple machines, because it's almost impossible to manufacture the perfect cam. And you can just work around the moment arm created by your body and the weight and approximate it and do the best you can with it.
Forgive me if I sound stupid here, but isn't the whole point though with the cam on like a lateral raise is to have a lot of fall off at the top to prevent that sticking point? And is that not then adapting the exercise machine to be optimal given the biomechanic limitations that we can't change?
So there you go with yes. So now the machine side raise theoretically could be more efficient than the dumbbell side raise. Because in the dumbbell side raise, if you were to use a full range of motion, you go from no effort to maximum effort. And the machine, you can just feel steady effort. The machine, now I did a talk at the most recent rec on exercise design and shoulder health. And the problem with a drastic fall off at the top of a side raise is you drive yourself right into impingement if you're not aware of the impingement positions. So if you're not aware that this is impingement, with a dumbbell, you're discouraged from going into impingement because that's where it gets heaviest. If the machine falls off, you could easily, in your enthusiasm, drive yourself into impingement.
Interesting.
So again, the thing that's common is your body is common wherever you work out. So if you know how the body's supposed to work, then you can adapt. So for instance, I would use that machine and I wouldn't go into impingement because I know what not to do. So I guess one final bit. We skipped all the spine stuff, but that'll take.
We did a fair amount of spine on an older podcast, didn't we? So we'll link to that as well if people want to, because that's pretty in depth on your perspective on the spine.
Yeah. So this was some of the spine. So getting back to the biomechanics chapters, this flow chart starts with biomechanics at the top, exercise at the bottom. And then if you follow the verticals down, for instance, spine, curves, stabilization, movement to exercises. The shoulder girdle goes to overhead and other movements to movement. Pelvis, hips, knees, ankles, coordinate, movement. So that's how I sorted it out. And so each section has different headings. Like it's not a template because each one moves differently, which relates differently to different exercises. Mm-hmm. So here's sort of my reference for the spine from Brunstrom's with the basic anatomy, from Brooks with what happens in extreme flexion extension, from ACE with the active range of motion, some of the things on spine injury and spine health guidelines, and then some of the posture stuff I was mentioning earlier, where sway back to the right is contraindicated as a posture, much less with weight on your back. And let's see here. So now the conclusion, I've summarized 250 pages in a couple of bullet points. Take-home points, right? So the point of good form isn't just like artistic judgment, right? It's that you want that your muscles are doing the work and you're protecting the supporting muscles and the connective tissue. And that I define good form for this, for joint-friendly fitness. You include the optimal range, you avoid the extreme ranges, and you manage your posture. All the other aspects of your program can vary as long as you don't interfere with those three things, right? So if you're so fatigued, you can't help but fall into the extreme range because you're doing too many sets, for instance, or too many set extenders, I would suggest not doing that. You'll get away with it for a little while, but as a regular thing, you would evaluate an exercise or a set rep scheme based on not loading the extreme ranges. If the exercise, you can't possibly avoid the extreme ranges, that gives you something to filter out an option. Don't ignore your own observations. If an exercise hurts, stop it, even if it's 5 stars by my interpretation. And then some of the not snappy, but exercise can be effective without being excessive. Exercise to challenge your fitness, not your safety. Work out smarter, then harder. And then more nice graphics from Autumn. 3 things you can do right away in your workout is not to let the weight or the machine push you into a stretch. Maintain your lumbar curve and then keep your hands in your peripheral vision. And you don't have to be perfect at that. You don't have to be perfect, but if you aim for that, what did I say here? Yes. You don't need perfection, but if you aim for that, you're probably within your margin of error. And that's what keeps people exercising as a lifetime habit. I've done the thing where you blow it out as hard as you can to get in as great a shape as you can. And then you're nursing your injuries. You come getting as great a shape as you can. So much more moderate.
Yeah.
Again, if we're talking about lifetime exercise, moderate's the way to go.
Yeah. I love this little bite-sized thing here, these 3 tips. 3 things to do to your workout ASAP to make it easier on your joints. Don't let the weight machine push you into a stretch. Maintain your lumbar curve. And number 3, keep your hands in a peripheral vision. Like, I think I've seen that. I don't know whether you put that on Amazon. I've seen other places where you've marketed the book, and I thought, what a great way to provide people with value before they even buy it. I think that's great. And obviously I learned a lot of that from you before, from reading Congruent Exercise and Moment Arm. And I remember every time whenever we have the Medics shoulder press, and you've got these handles, which pretty much do put your hands behind your peripheral vision. Mm-hmm. And I'd never use them. And I'm always thinking of you. I always, even when I'm doing, because you can do what we call like the middle grip, because we call that the back grip, which we don't really use, but like the middle grip where you're still using the front handles, but you're using them with your humerus abducted, right? Oh, sorry, you're externally rotated. Right. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Right. And then pushing up that way, but you're still seeing having your hands in your peripheral vision. Yeah, I do think about that a lot.
There's a lot of ways to skin the cat. It's not the grip per se. It's what your shoulders are doing. But in terms of a quick buzzword, if your hands in your peripheral vision, right now here they're not, and I can probably go back a little further. But once they disappear, you're like, okay, that's about far enough. So that's a rule of thumb. Like telling someone keep your hands anterior of the frontal plane, that doesn't do anything because you can't. What? Yeah, you can't.
Very good.
Oh yes, and and for anyone who hasn't already, that's the author link on Amazon. On the left is the entry for the print Joint Friendly Fitness, which is all 70 exercises, all the biomechanics chapters. On the right is the first Kindle where I pulled out just the home and small gym exercises. And only 1 or 2 chapters of biomechanics. And that one also has a foreword by Ellington Darden. And then in the future, I plan on breaking the chest, back, shoulders into a separate Kindle. That foreword is by Simon Shawcross.
Nice, Phil.
The arms, so all the biceps, triceps, forearms, that foreword is by John Little. And then the hip, trunk, thighs, and that foreword is by Amy Ashmore, who is a biomechanics PhD. She's got a bigger footprint in the ACE idea world and the physical therapy, continuing education world than in the HIIT community. And then also I'll be putting Moment Arm exercise back in print this is where they would follow to see what new is coming up.
Okay. Yeah. And thank you for that. We'll obviously have all of this stuff linked up on the blog post for this as well. And wherever you're watching this, so if you're on YouTube or Facebook or anywhere really, or on the blog over at highintensitybusiness.com, episode 429. Then we'll have links to all of Bill's stuff. So you'll be able to find that really easily if you forget the full names of the books, easier for you to find it. Bill, any parting thoughts? This has been fascinating as always, and I'm really excited to get this published.
I've pretty much done everything wrong. So a certain amount of this comes out of my own experience, my own bad experience. What's that? There's a line about good judgment comes from experience and experience comes from bad judgment. I very much understand when people who are new to HIIT or new to exercise want to dismiss this because they're all enthusiastic and they want to try all the cool stuff and they're discovering these concepts and it rings true because I was that guy. But in hindsight, I'm not entirely sure that anything I got from weight training, I wouldn't have gotten by doing this 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Not really. I'm not entirely convinced that doing enough wouldn't have been enough. And as much fun as I had training with my friends and pushing ourselves to excess and negative this and manual resistance this and training to the verge of crawling out of the place, not entirely sure what the effect. I know what the effect was, but I'm not sure that the result was significantly different than if I had just been very moderate all along.
Wise words. Thank you for that. Yeah, Bill, thanks so much for making the time. It's just definitely much longer than we both thought it would be, but I think it was smarter to get the entire deep dive into one podcast there. And for everyone listening, obviously you can go to the blog, go to highintensitybusiness.com, search episode 429. to find out. We'll get all the access to all the show notes, all the links, everything Bill's mentioned. If you're listening to this, the video will be embedded there, and obviously links to the books as well. And before you head off, don't forget to grab your free PDF guide on how to turn your HIIT business into a referral machine. It's a short, simple, step-by-step guide that I put together with Luke Carlson. He also provides a full-length video training on how Discover Strength produce referrals very effectively. And this is all stuff you can do now in your business for free and start getting more referrals and start growing your business faster. You can get that over at highintensitybusiness.com/ref. So that's ref short for referrals, REF, highintensitybusiness.com/ref. Bill, thank you so much again for doing this. And for everyone else, to get the show notes, go to highintensitybusiness.com, search for episode 429. And until next time, thank you very much for listening. Welcome to another episode brought to you by Imagine Strength, the future of safe, simple, and effective high-intensity training equipment. Are you a HIIT studio owner looking for equipment that's not just top-notch, but also tailored to your specific needs? Imagine Strength is your answer. Inspired by the legendary Arthur Jones, Imagine Strength is revolutionizing the HIIT industry with their state-of-the-art yet affordable equipment. Their team doesn't just sell HIIT equipment, they live and breathe it. I've personally experienced their gear at the Resistance Exercise Conference, and let me tell you, it was an intense workout that I won't soon forget, in the best way possible, of course. So why choose Imagine Strength? Number one, they provide customized solutions for HIIT studios. Number two, they have budget-friendly yet high-performance designs. And number three, they're committed to innovation and excellence in high-intensity training specifically. Founder Jeff Turner and his dedicated team are on a mission to make HIIT accessible to everyone. Getting started is easy. Number one, visit imaginestrength.com. Number two, consult with their expert team. And number three, choose the equipment that will skyrocket your business. Don't wait. Head over to imaginestrength.com and elevate your HIIT studio today with Imagine Strength.